This episode of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is brought to you by thegreatcourses.com, where you can watch or listen to thousands of lectures from top professors and experts. Get up to 80% off select classes by visiting thegreatcourses.com/galaxy. Today's show is also brought to you by Casper, an online retailer of premium mattresses for a fraction of the price, because everyone deserves a great night's sleep. Get $50 off any mattress purchase by visiting casper.com/galaxy and entering the promo code GALAXY.
Wired.com presents The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. And here is your host, David Barr Kirtley.
Hello, and welcome to episode 180 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. Today on the show, we'll be discussing the new Sci-Fi channel series The Expanse, based on the novels by James S.A, which is the pen name of authors Daniel Abraham and Ty Franck. And we previously interviewed Daniel back in episode 35 and Ty back in episode 113, so check those out if you missed them. And this may involve spoilers for the first book in the series, Leviathan Wakes, as well as for the first 4 episodes of the TV show, so just be aware of that. And I'm joined by 3 guests. So first up, we've got Andrew Liptak, who you may remember from our panel on the Sci-Fi channel shows Killjoys and Dark Matter in episode 167. He's the weekend's editor of Gizmodo and IO9, and he also co-edited the anthology War Stories, New Military Science Fiction. His reviews have appeared in Clark's World, Kirkus, Lightspeed, and Tor.com. So Andrew, welcome to the show.
Happy to be here.
Then next up, we've got Justin Landon. He's the host of the Rocket Talk podcast on Tor.com, and also a consulting editor with Tor.com Publishing. He was nominated for a Hugo Award and won a British Fantasy Award for his work on Speculative Fiction 2012, the year's best online reviews, essays, and commentary. So Justin, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, David.
And also joining us today is Liz Shannon Miller. She's the TV editor for IndieWire, and has also written for Giga Ohm, Attack of the Show, The New York Times, Variety, The Wrap, Nerve, and Thought Catalog. She also hosts the podcasts Liz Tells Frank What Happened In, and Very Good Television Podcast. So Liz, welcome to the show.
Hooray!
And today's show is brought to you by The Great Courses. Watch or listen to thousands of lectures on over 500 subjects. Each course is taught by top professors and leading experts from the most respected institutions in the world. And our featured course this week is called Your Deceptive Mind, a scientific guide to critical thinking skills. These 24 lectures cover everything from logical fallacies to cognitive biases to email scams. And the course is taught by Dr. Stephen Novella, an assistant professor of neurology at the Yale School of Medicine, and also the host of the Skeptic's Guide to the Universe podcast. And The Great Courses is giving our listeners a special limited time offer. 8 of their courses, including Your Deceptive Mind, are available now at up to 80% off their regular price. The other discounted classes are Thinking About Cybersecurity, Fundamentals of Photography, The Everyday Gourmet, The Science of Mindfulness, Understanding Investments, 12 Essential Scientific Concepts, and The Art of Storytelling. To take advantage of this special offer, go to thegreatcourses.com/galaxy. That's thegreatcourses.com/galaxy. Don't forget, go to thegreatcourses.com/galaxy. All right, so let's start out and talk about the first book in the Expanse series, Leviathan Wakes. So Andrew, you wrote a long article about this series for BarnesandNoble.com called Evolution of a Space Epic. So just tell us a bit about how this series came about.
Yeah, so I've been a fan of the books since before they came out. I picked up the Leviathan Wakes when it was an arc and fell in love with it. And as the TV show had started to come up, I was getting interested in sort of writing about, how do you go from a book to a television show? I interviewed James S.A, and it's his 2 parts, Ty Franck and Daniel Abraham. And I had asked them questions over the years, and I had sort of had the sense that there was a really interesting story behind it. So I basically emailed them and said, hey, I'd like to write this long article. How did you go from being where'd you get the idea from, and how did you go from being a television show? And as I started to dig a little bit deeper, the story got more and more interesting. So it was a very different type of origin story than most novels to television shows.
Well, yeah, tell us a bit about that, because it started out as a game world, right?
So what happened is that way back, I don't know, probably about 2003 or so, Ty had been coming up with these ideas for this space epic that he had wanted to, just play with, just ideas. And a friend of his had wanted to she had an opportunity to create a massive multiplayer online game for a Chinese internet provider, and was looking for pitches. So he's like, well, I got this idea. And he sort of started to develop some material for it, and went from there, developed a pitch. And then the pitch didn't go anywhere. The provider basically looked at the cost and said, nope, we're not doing that. So he basically just trunked it, and then and ended up turning it into a role-playing game on a play to post to play form. I think that's what the name is. And what you do there is it's basically just a role-playing game on a discussion forum. And he started coming up with this story with all this material that he'd come up with. And he was playing online for a couple of years, and then he moved down to New Mexico with his wife. And he fell in with Daniel Abraham, Georgia Martin, and a bunch of other writers down in that area. And they basically went to him and said, hey, we hear you do a really good role-playing game. How would you like to, we'd like to play this game that you've been doing. So he basically introduced them to that. And he started, developing more of the story. So that's when Daniel Abraham said, you've got a novel here, can I write it? So Ty basically told him, yeah, go ahead. And Daniel started writing it. And when he handed over to Ty Ty said, nope, this is all wrong. Let me go rewrite it. And that's when they basically started working together. Daniel wrote some stuff, then Ty would edit it, and then Ty would write some stuff, and then Daniel would edit it, and they basically would go back and forth chapter to chapter. And soon they had what eventually became Leviathan Wakes. All the story that's in Leviathan Wakes came from the games. So like there's several instances where this was all stuff that had come out of the game playing sessions that they had been putting together. So the book is really almost an adaptation of their role playing games.
Right. And do I have this right that Miller was Daniel's character in the game and he wrote those chapters in the book?
Yeah, I think so. And then there's one group that had been playing Holden's crew, and there's one character that meets a pretty grisly end. And that was a player who had to leave the game early, so he was told that he'd get a pretty epic death. And then, I think Daniel Abraham's group had been the ones playing with the mystery noir element. And so as they put the novel together, they basically mashed the two of them together, and it worked out pretty well.
Yeah. Well, so Justin, you told me that the first book review you ever wrote was Leviathan Wakes. Tell us a little bit about how that came about.
It's funny. I was just talking to the editor who bought the Expanse series from James S.A. Corey. His name is Dongwon Song, and he was at Orbit Books. And I asked him about that question, about why I got into the book, which was that it was actually added as ancillary content to the Dragon's Path, which was the first book in Daniel Abraham's Dagger and Coin series. And I wasn't a blogger at that point, but I saw an opportunity to get 2 books for one of which wasn't out yet. And so I thought that was cool. They were giving away this copy of Leviathan Wakes for free in the ebook. And I think they did the reverse too later. If you bought Leviathan Wakes, you got the ebook of Dragon's Path with it. But when I got Leviathan Wakes as sort of this advanced copy of it through the Dragon's Path, I said, oh, well, this is cool. I guess I'll write a review because a lot of people haven't read it yet, or because it's just attached in this way. And so I posted a review, and it was just sort of dumb luck. And then through that is how I actually got into reviewing. That was the first thing I posted on a blog, and then from obviously the rest is history. But yeah, I actually didn't like Leviathan Wakes very much, as it were. I ended up loving the rest of the series, but I think it's by far the weakest book.
So why do you think it's the weakest book?
I actually don't think the noir elements work very well adjacent to the space opera ones. I think Detective Miller is a bizarre character couched within the rest of the series, and I don't think it's any kind of surprise that you don't really see those noir elements popping up as much as the series goes along. Having heard the history from Andrew about how these books sort of evolved, it sounds like Miller was kind of Daniel Abraham's darling, right? And so it was in that first book, but Miller's role obviously decreases with each book for many reasons. I guess we can probably spoil that, but his role decreases, and I don't think we see that kind of noir stuff pop up again. I just thought it was a weird fit. I think Detective Miller is not a terribly interesting character personally. I actually don't think Jim Holden is a very interesting character either. And so that first book relies entirely on these two somewhat boring characters, and the series doesn't really sing until it's introduced in Caliban's War with Christian Avasarala and Bobby Draper that the series really takes off, in my opinion.
That's interesting. Well, Liz, let's get your perspective here. Tell us about how did you come to read Leviathan Wakes?
I came to it actually. My copy of Leviathan Wakes came from NBC Universal. I went to a press. I went to a press day for the for NBC's upcoming slate of projects back in April, I think, and they just kind of handed out copies of the first two books of The Expanse right there. So that's where that came in. And then I saw the pilot at Comic-Con with a friend of mine who was a huge fan of the books as well. And then I was like, okay, well, they seem to have done a really nice job of bringing the two worlds together.
And so did you read the book before you saw the show or vice versa?
Vice versa.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, because I'm the same way, so it'll be interesting how we see it differently as opposed to people who read the book first. But I guess I'm curious, Andrew, do you agree with what Justin's saying about the first book, or did you like it maybe more than he did?
I actually really liked Leviathan Wakes. I thought that the mystery, I like mysteries quite a bit, and I thought it worked pretty well. What I took away from the first book, and which you sort of see in the pilot, is that it is paced very deliberately. And what these guys have done is they put together a book that moves quickly, and it keeps you reading. And I think that's one reason why it really hooked a lot of people from that first book. That being said, the books do get better as they go on. Caliban's War, as Justin said, is a lot stronger, and there's a lot more interesting characters. Abaddon's Gate is really great. Cibola Burn, I wasn't as big of a fan of. I think that's actually the weakest entry in the series, but they pick right up again with Nemesis games, and it gets even better.
I think one thing that's really interesting about this series is that it seems like most science fiction is either set in the near future, like 1984, or it's set in the far future, like Star Trek, where there's hyperdrives and stuff like that. And there hasn't been a ton of stuff exploring the in-between phase. Humanity is spread throughout the solar system, but gone no farther. I don't know. Do you agree? Do you guys agree with that? Did that feel fresh to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one thing I really enjoy about the show is the fact that it has a really hard take on the brutality of space travel. Like, this is I think all the really great space stuff I've seen recently has always had this one overriding theme, which is space is a terrible place that is trying to kill you at every moment. And that's something that I think The Expanse really nails in a lot of respects.
Oh, the claustrophobic aspect of these books and the television series is just tremendous. Like, I have never seen another work of fiction that has made me feel as claustrophobic as the Expanse books do. Like, this notion of these tiny little capsules in this great void. I mean, that emotion that it captures is tremendous. And probably the thing the series does better than anything else.
Well, it's interesting because in this show, space is so unforgiving, but in a way, this show is unforgiving too, because there's so little explanation, so little exposition. And I mean, Liz, you're one of the people here who was not already familiar with the books when you saw it. Were you at all? Did you have trouble understanding what was going on at all? Because the show is it doesn't spoon feed you anything at all.
Not necessarily, but I think that's part of it is that I think the show does a nice job of kind of using the lexicon of other science fiction. So it's like, there are elements of it that felt familiar to me. There are elements that I understood. And I mean, I think in general, though, like, there's a lot you pick up via context that works really well. And I think that's by design. Like, I got to speak with the creators of the show. It's weird to talk about them being the creators of the show because, of course, it's based on the books. But, the executive producers, showrunners. And when I did, they made a big point about how they really tried to strip away as much exposition as possible because they just wanted to put you into the world of the show immediately.
Right. Could you say a little bit more about how you got set up with that interview and who those guys are and what their background is? That kind of stuff?
Yeah. I basically at the Television Critics Association press tour this summer. It's actually funny. Normally, the TCAs are a great opportunity to get interviews if you're a television critic or a television reporter, and because all the networks bring all of their major talent for upcoming shows to this one hotel in Beverly Hills or Pasadena, and so normally those interviews, you get like 15 minutes face to face with somebody, and it happens all day long. It's great. With I sat down with Mark Fergus, Hawk Ostby, and Naren Shankar, and we were sitting down outside, and we were talking about Sci-Fi, we were talking about the show, all this sort of stuff, and around half an hour into that conversation, they were still talking to me, and I was like, okay, I'll go with this. And then 45 minutes later, like, the PR rep wanders by and then wanders away again. I'm like, okay, well, I guess we're still talking, and we had a lot of fun stuff to talk about. And so I ended up getting a full hour with them, just getting into all the details and nuances of the show and how they were approaching it. And actually, I believe Ty, the writer Ty, was also there. He was sitting to the side and not saying anything, but kind of just listening to the conversation. It was weird, but he was very nice.
Right. Well, and I mean, a lot of times with TV people, you get the feeling that they're not that invested in science fiction. I actually heard Ty say in some of the meetings they went to, people asked them, like, does this have to be set in outer space? Which I think is pretty ridiculous.
No, that was literally one of the first things I joked with them about. And they were like, no, we had that meeting. We had the, does it have to be set in space meeting?
But I get the feeling just from watching the show that these guys are not that way, that they're very serious about making this great science fiction. And they also did, they wrote the scripts for Children of Men and Iron Man, I think. Is that right?
Yeah, they're on some of the credited writers for those projects. Yeah. But what's actually really neat is that one of the things that we talked about is the fact that they went outside of the sci-fi realm to find writers. Like, they brought in a writer from Mad Men. They brought in a writer from something else that wasn't sci-fi related, and it was just because they wanted to find people who had a really interesting, nuanced take on these projects, on this world.
When I got to visit the set when they're doing the production, and I had a long meeting with Hawk and Mark, and Hawk was actually saying that he wasn't interested in this at first. Mark had picked up the book and had read through it and said, hey, this is a project we should work on, and Hawk had basically said, no, I'm not interested. It's going to be basically, people in space doing space things, and that's not interesting. And then Mark convinced him to read it, and he read it the first book in a day, and basically said, you got to get that meeting. This is not what I thought it was. So they really, I think that the thing that the two guys found when they were doing the initial writing is that this was a character story in space, not a space story about technology and people just happen to be along. This is really at the core of it. It's a really personality driven narrative.
That said, though, I think one really cool aspect of the show is the fact that they are trying also to do some stuff that's different from other sci-fi things, like the whole concept of the ships and the way they move through space. Like, that's a lot of stuff that they're trying to do that we haven't seen before. On
IO9, when I did a post about this a while back, and it was when the pilot episode is now freely online everywhere, and I posted up about that, and some people were like, "What do you mean this is realistic? You have people standing on spaceships, on the floor," and all the commenters were sort of jumping in. It's like, no, that's actually they addressed that. So what's really neat is that they've actually gone through and thought through a lot of the physics and a lot of the design, and this also shows down through the set design and the actual the trappings of the world. It's all really well thought out.
Yeah. Well, so I want to get Justin in here. So Justin, you mentioned that you had sort of mixed feelings about the book. Do you have mixed feelings about the show as well, or do you think that they've improved on the book in some ways?
That's a good question, a fair question. And I'll say, when I first watched the pilot, I watched the pilot, I don't know, probably 3 or 4 weeks ago. And I was a little nervous after watching the pilot. I thought the pilot there were some weird technical things with the show that I thought the sound was weird. I thought the Belter patois was going to be really challenging. And so I was getting kind of nervous about it. But then I saw the subsequent episodes, and like all of my concerns were pretty much left in the dust. And I think the way they've incorporated Christian Abasarala's point of view in particular, and the way they've adjusted some of the history of Holden's crew and the things they've added earlier than they did in Leviathan Wakes is giving all of the context that, to me, makes the series richer and more interesting that you don't get until later. But they're getting it right up front. So we're learning more about these characters quicker. And as a result, we're buying into them quicker.
Well, Justin, you mentioned that you had trouble making out the dialogue. I certainly had trouble making out a lot of the dialogue. The first time I watched this, I was just using like kind of laptop speakers that were not particularly close to me. And I was really having trouble making stuff out. I don't know, Liz, did you have any trouble understanding what the characters were saying in this show?
Not particularly, but I can see why that would be an issue. Again, like I said, a lot of stuff I was just kind of picking up through context, and, the show deliberately doesn't make it easy for you to understand what's going on, but I think that's one of its appeals, frankly.
Yeah, I mean, the first time I watched it, I absolutely loved it. I loved every minute of it, but I couldn't understand what half the characters were saying, so...
I think that's solved. I actually think that was a pilot problem. I don't think it's a problem in the second, third, or fourth episodes. I really do think it was just... I don't know if there was something about the sound ending in that early pilot that they put out that just wasn't right, and maybe it'll be corrected when it's aired on Sci-Fi. I don't know, but it definitely was hard to hear stuff, like they had the background sounds amped up or something, and there was a lot more of the Belter language without any contextual preparation in the first episode that they start to actually prepare you for in the second and third episode. There's a really interesting scene where Havelock, Detective Miller's partner, it's not clear if he's visiting a prostitute for many reasons or if he's only visiting her for her to teach him Belter, but he's actually learning Belter from her. And I think that's an interesting discussion for us to actually understand what they're doing with their hands and the words they use. And I almost think that should have been in the first episode because I think it would have eased people's concerns, but it's an interesting choice to put it in the second episode like they did.
I would definitely recommend people read the book first, though, because I watched these episodes and then I went back and read that section of the book, and then I went back and watched the episodes again, and it made a lot more sense the second time around. But I don't know, Andrew, what do you think about the Belter language and the sound? Did you have any issues with this at all?
I watched it with a couple of friends, and we had the first 4 episodes with a couple of friends, and we all thought that the sound was a little bit weird, and I had been thinking that the sound mix was a little bit off, either because it wasn't finished or it was a sort of a piracy thing, so that you don't get the full finished episode. They sent these press packs out to a lot of people. I'm guessing that the episodes have probably leaked online somewhere. So that was my initial guess, is that the sound was just off, just so you wouldn't get a perfect product, and then the final version will be better. At least I hope. As far as actually understanding the characters, I had a little bit of trouble, but I think that's deliberate. Is it because you're sort of looking in on this very different world of the Belters, and they have their own little weird language. They have a lot of hand motions. The hand motions come from, and reading from the books, is it because they were have to communicate with spacesuits. And what I liked about this is that they focused very closly on the background characters. So if you watch the episode and you look at all the background characters, you see that they are, there's the hand motions, there's the body language, there's all this stuff that gets you immersed in this world, and I really, really like that. I thought that was a really good choice. I don't know. I've read all the books and a couple times, so I am not really a good person to say whether or not this works really well. But I understood it fairly well, and I could understand what they're doing. And I thought it was a very good way to sort of build the world without actually, telling everybody every single thing that they're doing to explain it. I know that they do sort of point out, this is what this hand motion means, but then they just sort of go on from there. And there's some other little background things that you see, and I thought it worked really, really well.
Yeah, well, I mean, you mentioned the world building, and I thought that was one thing the show did amazingly well. Just both in the hand gestures kind of things, and also the spaceships and the environment, all the stuff. It just looked like they spent a lot of money and put a lot of thought and a lot of time and care just getting everything you look at just exactly right.
I actually saw the episode where Holden is dealing with the Martian Navy, and the Martians actually start talking about the cultural differences between Mars and Earth. I don't recall that I don't recall any of that. I actually feel like I know more about what makes Mars tick from watching the Expanse television series than I do from reading all of the books, which I thought was interesting. I just don't recall those moments in the books.
No, it's in there. I'm pretty sure I remember reading about it, and because it's not something that they dwell on a lot in the books. But I do remember them talking about how the show, I think, does a little bit better job of it. But the books do talk about how everybody is trying to focus on one thing, which is basically terraforming the planet, and that actually becomes a much bigger storyline later in the series. I think that's something that they're still playing with, especially as certain events happen, book 4 and beyond.
And we'll be back with more of our panel right after this word from our sponsor. So today's show is brought to you by Casper. If you need a new mattress, just pop on over to casper.com/galaxy and order today. You won't have to visit a showroom or haggle over prices, and the mattress will be shipped to you in a box that's the size of a mini fridge. Then all you have to do is open up the box and watch as the mattress naturally expands to its full size. Just think of it like your own personal crash couch. As a science fiction fan, you probably know that a crash couch is what space travelers in books like Leviathan Wakes use to cushion their bodies against the intense G-forces involved with accelerating and decelerating a spaceship. But Dave, you might say, I'm not on a spaceship, so I don't need a crash couch. But that's where you're wrong. You see, the planet Earth is basically a giant spaceship hurtling through space at roughly 1,000 miles per hour. And all night long, as you sleep, your body is subjected to a steady 1G, pushing you down into your mattress. James Holden would never use some cheap second-rate crash couch, and neither should you, especially when you can get a twin-size Casper mattress for just $500 or a king-size one for $950. Your Casper mattress will arrive in the mail, and you have 100 days to try it out. And if you decide not to keep it, Casper will pick it up for free and give you a full refund. So if you're interested, just visit casper.com/galaxy and enter the promo code GALAXY. Terms and conditions apply. All right, so now let's get back to our panel.
I wanted to look up something, which is we talked someone actually visited the set, but apparently they used basically about 80,000 square feet of soundstage in order to build like so much of the world of the show, which is really incredible.
Yeah, I got to visit the set up in Toronto when they're filming. They're filming the last couple episodes, and just the way I described it and the way I was told is that this is the same soundstage they used for Pacific Rim, which had, they're incredibly huge. These are enormous buildings. And I got to walk up to the Rocinante and then board it. And it was just, you walk in there and, oh my God, this is a spaceship. There's grating on the floor. There's warning signs plastered like as you would expect in any military vehicle. There's handholds, there's fire extinguishers, there's the seats look worn. I mean, this is all like, oh my God, it's a spaceship. But even just looking at the other sets, I mean, this is really high quality stuff that they're putting in there. They've dumped a lot of money into it, and they've put a lot of effort making it look right. And part of that, I think, is that the authors are involved and they've got all the right people involved to make sure it looks right. But I think they've determined that this is a direction they want to see TV go in. This is the right story for it, and they've decided it's worth the investment.
Yeah, and I want to emphasize that too. I don't know if we've said this explicitly, that Ty and Daniel are actually in the writer's room, working on this show, which is very, very unusual, I think, for a TV show that's being adapted from books.
Well, it's one of the many, many comparisons that you can draw between this and Game of Thrones, actually. Like the fact that, the author is really heavily involved, the authors are really heavily involved, that they're really trying to keep fidelity to the original story while also making the changes necessary for this to work as a TV show.
Right. Although in the case of Game of Thrones, my understanding is that George R.R. Martin only writes one script per season. So, well,
I mean, but at the same time, like, he's involved with the development of the story, especially right now, because Game of Thrones has officially caught up with his books. So he's essentially developing the story he's developing his story in conjunction with their development of the TV show.
Right. So, but no, I agree with you. But I think that in this, I think it's even more. I mean, I think Ty and Daniel, they're in the writers' room every day, working on the show, giving their feedback. So I think it's even taken that even further. Do you want to say a little bit more, Andrew, about? You said this is kind of like a new direction for television. Have you heard stuff from the Sci-Fi Channel about kind of what place they see this show occupying and what they're planning to do in this direction?
Nothing from them, but just more of a sense of what they've been planning to do. We talked a little bit about this in the last episode I was on with Killjoys and Dark Matter, but Syfy has gotten beaten up over the last couple of years for airing some kind of crappy shows and really sort of turning their back on the classic space opera stuff. So like the shows like Stargate, Battlestar, Farscape, and all those other ones. They really stopped doing those types of shows in favor of stuff that was either, it seemed a little bit cheaper, not as dramatic, not as exciting. And obviously your mileage will vary depending on what you like, but a lot of people didn't like that about Syfy, and they really thought that they were, turning their back on their roots. So I think that they've had some leadership changes in the past year or two. I think part of that is that they determined that let's go back to what the show is really known for. Over the past couple of years, science fiction, fantasy television has gotten really big. I mean, just look at Game of Thrones, look at The Walking Dead. These are shows that could have been on the Sci-Fi Channel, and they could have done really well there because that's sort of their wheelhouse. But these other networks, which aren't known for science fiction, are taking the risk and reaping some really incredible rewards from it. So I think that they saw that they need to take a risk. They need to go back to something that people are really asking for, which is space. So they started really focusing on that. So we saw Killjoys and Dark Matter come out earlier this year, which I thought were really in the vein of the older like Stargates and Farscapes type shows, because they were light, they're funny, they took place in space, they had adventure, and now they're really doubling down by going sort of the Battlestar route with this new show. So I think that the new direction is going to be, let's go look at what science fiction shows are out there. And I know they've got others in the pipeline, and not just science fiction, but fantasy. They're doing The Magicians later on. And I think that they're really, pushing in a more critically acclaimable direction, in space.
I mean, the fact that they're pairing the launch of The Expanse with, of all the things in this world to adapt, Childhood's End, like that's a huge project for them. And like, honestly, like kind of baffling. Like this is the thing that Stanley Kubrick couldn't figure out how to make. And so they're trying to take on this really classic work of sci-fi. Like that's huge.
Yeah, it's a 6-hour thing. It's going to be over 3 nights. I saw the first night. It was pretty good. So I'm optimistic about it at this point. I think one thing going for them is that they have 6 hours to play with, which is a lot more than Stanley Kubrick could have done, I think, in a feature film.
Very true.
I'm a little weirded out by that, because Childhood's End is a weird book, and I haven't seen any of it yet. I'm interested to see what they do with it, but that is definitely, I mean, they do some interesting miniseries events. Like Ascension from last year was definitely a strange one, and I don't know if that one quite worked as well. So I'll be interested to see how well that one works. If it succeeds, it'll be another one of these sort of critically acclaimed things, I suspect. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how well that comes out.
Right. Well, but I mean, this is what I think most of us science fiction readers have always wanted is, there's all these great science fiction novels, and you're like, oh, why don't they just turn these into TV shows and movies? And so I'm really optimistic that seems to be becoming more common now. And Justin, in one of your pieces that I read, you were talking about this, like, why don't they just adapt to the stuff that everybody loves already, rather than trying to get Hollywood people to come up with some ideas?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think there's no question that the success of some of these other massive adaptations is informing their decision here, but it is crazy to think that like Hollywood would just take something from scratch that has no existing footprint in the consumer's mind, when you have some tremendously successful intellectual properties that are perfectly adaptable, ready to go, with existing fan bases that have, in the case of The Expanse, has hit the New York Times bestseller list. I mean, even if you're only talking about a couple of 100,000 fans, out there, I mean, that's a huge leg up when it comes to word of mouth and that kind of stuff. And given that TV is moving away from, appointment viewing, that word of mouth thing is way more important for television than it's ever been before. And now it's almost like book selling. It's like this notion of like, you have to know where to look to get it in a lot of cases. If I hadn't seen Jessica Jones blow up on Twitter, I wouldn't have even thought to look for it on Netflix. And I think it's on Netflix. I actually have no idea. I think it's on Netflix.
It is Netflix.
But that's the thing is like word of mouth is how we find out about television now. It's not like you just tune in onto CBS and it just pops onto your TV in the way that it did 10 years ago. And so I think adaptation is the best way because the word of mouth and the buzz is way more high for these properties than it is for something new.
I also want to make the point that with an adaptation, you have the advantage of, the Achilles heel of a lot of big science fiction shows in recent years, I don't want to mention any names, is that they had a good idea for what they were going to do in season 1 and had no idea what they were going to do in season 5. And that showed really dramatically. Whereas when you have this book series that's, you have 5 or 6 books, I think it's going to 9 or more books ultimately. There's a lot of thought has already been put into where this story is going before the adapters even have to wrestle with that stuff.
And the problem there is that because the Expanse, they've projected out to be nine volumes, so they're just a little bit over halfway through. What happens if the show gets canceled at season 3 or season 4? So you sort of have this pitfall of having a really great story that you're supporting at first. You can't support the really long-term story without at least thinking about, how do you end it short term. So I hope that they will plan ahead for that. And if the show doesn't last for 9 seasons or more than 9 seasons, you're going to have to basically, it's going to change from what the books have planned out, and it might change the caliber of the show, which is good and bad. There's certainly good things that they can do with the TV show that will make it different from the books.
I don't know. There's definitely a false climax in Abaddon's Gate where if they tweak the proto-molecule storyline just slightly, they could easily end it there.
Well, that's also a result of how the books were published, because they sold them as a trilogy. And as I was talking to them, I was sort of figuring out why this was, but they basically said, yeah, we sold it as a trilogy because that's what you sell. And by the time they had written Abaddon's Gate, they basically wanted to make sure that they could end that particular arc well. But at that point, they also said, look, we have a longer story we want to write. Let us know now, while we're writing this third book, if it's going to be the final one or not. Because if you want it to be the final one, we'll end it. If we don't want it to be the final one, we can keep going and we'll change it accordingly. So that's sort of how the books came about. And they actually see the books as duologies. So Leviathan Wakes, Caliban's War sort of tell their own arc. Abaddon's Gate and Cibola Burn tell their own arc. And then Nemesis Games and I don't remember what the 6th book's called. Those books are basically one novel that is just cut in half.
We talk about the books and, having endings and all that. Apparently there is like a true official ending for the entire series that they've revealed to the creators, which I found, which is always interesting in these sorts of contexts, because how that gets adapted, how that gets changed over the course of the series. That's a big question. But any TV show is always playing with this, playing with fire when it comes to like, hey, do we, develop all the story in season 2, or do we let that go out for longer, even though we're not totally sure there will be a season 3?
Right. Yeah, I actually thought they have the actual last line has already been written, so they know pretty specifically where this is going.
And they are going on to a season 2. They've already started. I don't think it's been officially been greenlit by Syfy, but they've basically got their writers' room together and they're writing the scripts for another season right now. So that gives them a little bit more room to work with this first season.
Yeah, I always want a TV show to kind of, when they go into season 2, I always want them to kind of take a, Wire approach where they just, now we're at the docks and now we're caring about all these new characters. But they might actually do that with this one.
The books certainly do that. Each book introduces a new set of characters. So Caliban's War introduces a father whose daughter is lost. There's a Bobby, the Space Marine, who I I'm with Justin. I cannot wait to see how they do her. She's my absolute favorite character. Abaddon's Gate, they introduce a whole bunch of other characters. Cibola Byrne, there's a whole bunch of new characters, and it's not until book 5 that they actually go back, and the only point of view characters are really just Holden's crew, and that's the first time that they've actually not introduced any new viewpoints.
What did you think, Andrew, about the casting in this? Did the characters match your image of them from reading the books?
Naomi Nagata is dead on perfect. They could not have gotten a better actress for her. She is just stunning, and and she is the reason to watch the show. She's going to be a major character for this, and I can't wait to see what they do with her. Thomas Jane as Miller, I thought was really, really good. He captured a lot of Miller's mannerisms and his appearance and his attitude towards things. I thought that was really, really well done. Alex matches a bit, pretty much what I had envisioned. Holden, not as much. When I saw the casting news of that, I'm like, well, he seems really young, and a lot of other people sort of seem to assume that Holden was a much older character and a lot more, I guess, not as pretty. But I mean, seeing him on the screen, I thought he did a pretty good job. The only real character I didn't really get was Amos. He doesn't match
totally agree.
He doesn't match up with how I envisioned him at all. I sort of envisioned the guy. What was the brother-in-law from Breaking Bad?
Dean Norris.
Yeah, maybe. The cop guy who's balding.
Dean
yes,
Norris.
Okay. I'm terrible with actors' names. I always envisioned him as like the perfect person to play Amos. And I mean, so far he seems to be doing the current actor seems to be doing a really good job, and I'm really interested to see what he takes from it. But he's not what I envisioned at all. But I'll trust the creators. They're the guys who created the books. I assume that they know what they're doing, and we'll see what they do for the next couple episodes.
I think Amos is just way too pretty on the show. Like if you know Amos's backstory, like the guy on screen does not fit. I mean, I imagined like Tom Hardy after he got his ass kicked. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that's kind of what I envisioned. A much more, and that's sort. I don't want to use words I'll regret using, but like he should look a little bit more like he's come up on the streets, and that Amos just looks way too soft to me. But I guess he's certainly good looking and muscular, and that's another thing. Like this is a guy who's been living in space for a long time. Like I know Amos is described as being muscular, but I think the Amos on screen might be a little too muscular for the whole what we know about what it does for bone density and that kind of thing.
He did get the sort of sociopath element right, I thought. He and with the way that he looks at Naomi for guidance and things, I thought that their relationship was tweaked a little bit in the show, and I really like how they did it. So I'll be really interested to see what direction they take that in.
Something I found interesting was that of all the characters on the show, this was the one that that Hawk Ostby cited as his favorite to write, because I'm looking at the interview I did. His reactions to things are so different, completely different than what we were used to. It's like he's got a bent antenna.
Did you have, Liz, like favorite actors, or like what did you think of the casting overall?
I mean, I think it was a really great idea to bring forward, I never can remember how to say her name, Sharon Agadashu.
Yeah.
That's my basic approximation. But
wait, I have it right here. I'm going to say Shora Agdashlu.
Okay.
Something along those lines.
Point is, beautiful actress, Academy Award nominee, and such a great presence in this show. I was really excited to see her as a presence, especially the way she's used in the first episode. I think is a really great moment for the show and for Sci-Fi.
And her voice is perfect too. Like she's exactly as I imagined Avasarala in the books. The downside is that she can't swear in the TV show, and she really does in the books. So that's the one downside.
Apparently in season 2, they're actually going to be able to give her a little bit more of a potty mouth. They're gonna their ratings gonna go up a bit.
Excellent.
But they mentioned it specifically because of her. Like they're like, we can't. She couldn't swear quite as much as we wanted her to. But next year, we'll be able to make that happen.
The one other comment I'll make about casting that I number one, super delighted that it's a very diverse cast. I think Sci-Fi could have easily defaulted to all the other science fiction casts of years gone by, and they didn't do that, which is awesome. However, like there is one very interesting casting choice that I thought was strange, which is Ade, the girlfriend of Jim Holden. Is a Nigerian in the books and is a white character in the TV series, which was such a strange choice for me. Like I don't know why they did that, given how diverse the rest of the cast is, but it really stood out to me as a fan of the books that they casted that character that way. I don't know. I thought it was strange.
Yeah, well, I mean, there was also Lieutenant Lopez was a white actor as well.
Lieutenant Lopez?
Yeah, wasn't that was his name, right? The guy who I don't want to get into spoilers, but
the medical officer?
No,
the guy who interrogates them.
Oh, on the Martian ship?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I didn't pick up on his name.
Man Bun?
Yeah. I actually thought that actor did a great job.
Yeah.
I thought he was fantastic as an actor, yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's always you talk to people about the casting choices, and it's always so tough because I think every creator at this point really wants to commit to diversity, but at the same time, it's kind of like life. You can't help who you fall in love with, and so a lot of people, I think a lot of people get kind of sucked into these like, we just like that actor too much to not cast him.
Yeah,
like
I could understand that in that case because I did think that guy did a fantastic job with that character.
Speaking of casting, what did you guys think of Fred Johnson, the guy they cast for that role? I don't know if Liz or David know much about Fred Johnson, but he's a huge player as the series moves along. And like the guy that got to play him, Andrew, to me felt he didn't look hard enough to me. I don't know.
Who was that in the show?
He was the guy who was working. He was the one who threatened the Space Mormons.
Okay,
so he plays a really pivotal role. He's sort of this leader of the OPA, and he's not really. I don't know if he's who I would have chosen, but I think he's going to do a pretty interesting job with it. I know he was big in Walking Dead and some other things, but I mean. Yeah, I don't know. I think he'll do fine.
All right, so we're pretty much out of time. So I guess maybe we should just sort of wrap this up. Are there any things that you guys are hoping to see in future episodes? Directions you hope the show goes in, or without spoilers, things from the future books you're hoping to see? Anything like that?
I'll just say what I'm very anxious to see, which is how they actually handle the proto-molecule, which they haven't really even discussed on the show yet. But the proto-molecule is the central plot MacGuffin, at least in the first book and really throughout the series. And we haven't seen it yet. And how they handle what is really a bizarre science fictional plot MacGuffin on a show that is not doing bizarre science fictional plot MacGuffins like most science fiction shows do. Like this has this very authentic, gritty vibe to it. And they're going to have to introduce this thing that is different, and how they handle that I'm very interested to see. And I will say the other thing I'm looking forward to is hopefully they lens flare a little bit less on the show. Like, man, there's a lot of lens flares. So otherwise the camera work is exquisite. Like I love the cinematography, but I could do with a little less lens flaring.
I agree. Well, not necessarily with the lens flare. I'm a sucker for lens flare. I don't know why. Just me.
I'm with you there, Liz. I like the lens flare.
But I agree that the most exciting thing about the show is going to be how it takes what's a really grounded approach and builds in some harder sci-fi aspects to it.
I have to say, I'm really, as I said before, I'm really excited to see what they do with Bobby. She's introduced in Caliban's War and is just absolutely phenomenal. And she actually comes back later on in the series, which I was happy to see. She's got she's a pretty kick-ass character. She's got a suit of power armor, and I really want to see what the production design for that is. But if they stick with the track that the books are going, and this will be seasons and seasons later, but I'm really interested to see what they do with the new worlds on Cibola Burn and what they handle with the major crises in Nemesis games. If they get to that point, there's some really interesting things that they can do on a television perspective and story perspective. But first, we have to get through the first couple seasons, and I'm really interested to see what they do with the long arc of the Belter War and stuff like that.
All right, great. Yeah, and I just want to say, in case it's not clear, that I just absolutely love the show so far. I'm really excited that this is the direction that Syfy is going. This is like kind of the show I always wanted. It looked, every indication so far is that this is the science fiction show I wanted to see all my life. So I just really strongly recommend everyone check it out.
From the first couple episodes, I have to say I like it a lot better. A lot better, but I like it more than I like Battlestar Galactica. I'm a big fan. I've had people say that, but I really like it. I think that the story is going to be a lot stronger and a lot more focused, and I like the characters, and yeah, I'm on board.
100% agree. And I don't watch a ton of television anymore. My wife watches an immense amount, but I've kind of eased back. But I cannot remember the last time that a television show has made me need to urinate. The tension on the show is really well done. Every show ends with like this really great last bit of tension, and you get the little, the stomach cramps, and it's just really well done. And I can't remember too much TV that has done that for me. So I'm all in.
Yeah, I do watch a lot of TV, and I can tell you that this is even in the scope of everything that's going on right now. Like, this is one of the more under the radar than other projects, but it's still really exciting. And especially really exciting because of what it represents about Syfy's new direction.
All right, cool. So I think that's a good note to end on. So we've been speaking with Andrew Liptak, Justin Landon, and Liz Shannon Miller. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that was our panel. So big thanks again to Andrew Liptak, Justin Landon, and Liz Shannon Miller for joining us on the show. Big thanks as well to Mike Prothero and Arya Brill, who both just signed up this week to support us on Patreon. Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoy the show and want it to continue, please sign up to give us $1 or $2 per episode over at patreon.com/geeks. And if you'd rather make a one-time or fixed monthly contribution, you can do that via PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. And I'd like to thank Jim Denton and Sachimi Dharmaratne, who just became PayPal patrons number 127 and 128. So big thanks again to everyone who's contributed. We really appreciate it. I'd also like to thank our sponsors for today's show, The Great Courses and Casper Mattress. For special discounts, visit thegreatcourses.com/galaxy or visit casper.com/galaxy and enter the promo code GALAXY. All right, so that was our show. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.
The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is a production of Wired.com. For more information about the show, visit geeksguideshow.com. To learn more about your host, visit davidbarrkirtley.com. Music and voiceover produced by yours truly, Jack Kincaid. If you enjoyed this program, tell your friends. If you didn't enjoy it, tell no one. Thank you for listening.